He had lived on that road long before anyone called it valuable. Back then, it was just a narrow strip of pavement cutting through open land, with trees leaning close and dust settling quietly after every passing car. The man chose that place because it was calm. No traffic noise. No neighbors telling him how to live. Just space, time, and the comfort of knowing things stayed the same from one day to the next. His mornings followed a steady rhythm. He woke up early, stepped outside with a cup of coffee, and looked down the road as the sun came up. Sometimes a delivery truck passed. Sometimes a neighbor waved while driving by. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt controlled. The road was simply there, doing what it always had done. That calm started to shift when construction began a little farther down. At first, he didn't pay much attention. New houses were going up everywhere these days. Trucks came and went, workers shouted across open land, and the sound of machines filled the air for months. He assumed that once the homes were finished, things would settle back into silence. But the silence never returned. Cars started using the road more often. People he didn't recognize drove past his place. Some waved, some didn't. He didn't mind sharing the road. It had always been used by whoever needed it. That was how it worked for years. No signs, no rules posted. Just common sense. One afternoon, a white SUV stopped near his mailbox. A man stepped out wearing a neat shirt with a small logo stitched on the chest. He walked up with a friendly smile and handed over a piece of paper. "It's just a notice." The man said the paper talked about speed limits, parking rules, and approved access hours. It mentioned an organization name he had never heard before. At the bottom was a warning about future fines. The man read it twice. Then he looked up. "I think you've got the wrong address," he said calmly. The visitor smiled again, but this time it felt tight. "This road now falls under community guidelines." That sentence stuck. After the SUV drove away, he stood there longer than usual, the paper folded in his hand. Community guidelines. He had never agreed to any community. He had never signed anything. Still, he assumed it was a mistake that would clear itself up. Over the next week, more papers appeared. One was placed on his door. Another was mailed. Each one sounded more serious than the last. They spoke about compliance, penalties, and enforcement. The tone shifted from polite to firm. He tried calling the number listed. After waiting on hold, he finally reached someone who spoke quickly and confidently. She explained that a homeowners association now managed the surrounding area. According to her, the road was part of their operational zone. He asked a simple question. Who decided that? There was a pause. Then she repeated the policy. That was the moment he realized this wouldn't end easily. Neighbors started talking. Some were angry. Some were scared. A few had already paid small fines just to avoid trouble. One neighbor mentioned that security vehicles had begun noting license plates. Another said a guest was stopped and questioned late one evening. The man listened more than he spoke. He didn't rush into arguments. He had learned long ago that loud reactions often lead nowhere. Instead, he watched. He read every notice carefully. He noted the language. He paid attention to what they claimed and what they didn't. What bothered him most wasn't the rules themselves. It was the way they appeared overnight, as if authority could simply be declared and accepted without question. The road hadn't changed. The land hadn't moved. Only the confidence of the people sending the letters had grown. One morning, as he stood by the edge of the road, a black sedan slowed down. A uniformed guard leaned out and asked him to move his parked vehicle farther back. "This is a fire access zone," the guard said. The man looked around. There were no signs. No markings. Just the same pavement he had seen for years. "I've parked here for a decade," he replied. "Well, the rules are different now," the guard said before driving off. That phrase followed him the rest of the day. Different now, that evening. He pulled out an old folder from a cabinet he rarely opened. Inside were yellowed papers, maps, and copies of documents from when he bought the property. He hadn't looked at them in years. At the time, they were just part of the process. Now they felt important again. He spread everything across the table and read slowly. He wasn't searching for conflict. He just wanted clarity, the kind that comes from facts, not opinions. The road appeared again and again in those papers, not just as a line on a map, but as a defined piece of land. Words like access, easement, and ownership showed up more than once. Some sections were confusing. Others were surprisingly clear. He made notes. He highlighted lines. He compared dates. Outside, another security vehicle passed. Over the next few days, enforcement became more visible. Signs were posted without warning. Speed limit markers appeared overnight. A notice was taped to his gate, warning of possible penalties if violations continued. He felt frustration, but it was quiet frustration. Not the kind that leads to shouting, but the kind that sharpens focus. He noticed how the HOA representatives spoke as if everything was already settled, as if questioning them was pointless. At a small gathering near the new homes, an HOA member spoke confidently to residents. "We control access for safety reasons," she said. "The road belongs to the community now." The man stood at the back, listening. Belongs. That word didn't match what he had read at his table when the meeting ended. People left feeling uneasy. Some whispered about moving. Others talked about hiring lawyers, but doubted they could afford it. The HOA representatives left smiling, convinced they had secured obedience. The man went home and sat down again with his papers. He didn't know exactly how this would end yet. He didn't even know how far it would go. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about a road anymore. It was about who truly understood what they claimed to control. He closed the folder, placed it carefully back into the cabinet. Outside, the road stretched on quietly. It's unchanged by rules written on paper. For now, the next few weeks changed the feeling of the road completely. What once felt open and quiet now felt watched. Cars slowed down near the signs. People checked their mirrors more often. Even the wind through the trees felt different, like it carried tension instead of peace. The man noticed how small actions began to disappear. Neighbors stopped parking near the edges. Visitors called ahead, worried about where they could stop. Delivery drivers hesitated, unsure if they were allowed to be there. The road was still the same piece of pavement, but fear had settled on it like a shadow. Another letter arrived in the mail. This one looked more official. Thicker paper. Stronger words. It mentioned violations observed and warned about escalating penalties. It did not explain who gave the authority. It only stated that authority existed. He read it slowly, then set it down without anger. He had reached a point where frustration no longer helped. Understanding did. That evening, a neighbor stopped by. He looked tired and uneasy. He said he had been fined for letting a friend park near his fence for a few minutes. The amount wasn't large, but the message was clear. "They're serious," the neighbor said. "They won't stop." The man nodded. "They're confident," he replied. There was a difference. The neighbor asked if he planned to fight back. The man didn't give a clear answer. Not because he was unsure, but because he wasn't ready to speak yet. He had learned that plans shared too early often fail before they begin. Instead, he asked questions. About when the first notices appeared. About who signed them. About how the HOA described the road. Each detail mattered. Later that night, he returned to the old documents. This time, he didn't just read. He studied. He compared the maps to newer satellite images. He traced the road's path with his finger. Following it from one property line to the next, one thing became clearer with every page. The road existed long before the neighborhood. It had been used by farmers, landowners, and families who lived there decades earlier. It wasn't built by the HOA. It wasn't maintained by them either. The next morning, a security vehicle blocked part of the road while a crew installed another sign. The sign warned against unauthorized use. The words felt heavy, as if they were meant to scare rather than inform. He watched from a distance, saying nothing. Later that day, he drove into town and visited the county records office. The building was quiet, filled with old shelves and the soft sound of papers moving. He spoke with a clerk and requested historical property records for the area. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "That goes back a while," she said. "That's fine," he replied. He spent hours there, reading through files most people never asked for. Some pages were faded. Some were handwritten. But the truth didn't disappear just because time passed. What he found didn't shock him. It confirmed what he already suspected. The road was listed separately from the surrounding land. Ownership had changed hands before. It had never been included in later development transfers. It had simply been ignored. On the way home, he felt something new. Not anger. Not fear. Clarity. Meanwhile, the HOA grew bolder. Notices now included deadlines. Meetings were announced where residents were told attendance was expected. The language shifted from suggestions to commands. At one meeting held in a rented hall, the HOA representatives stood at the front and spoke confidently. They talked about safety, order, and shared responsibility. They showed slides with diagrams and rules. When someone asked about legal authority, the answer was vague. "It's covered under our governing documents." One representative said, "No one asked which documents." The man sat quietly near the back. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't argue. He watched how the room reacted. Some people nodded along. Some looked confused. A few looked worried. Fear worked better than logic in that room. After the meeting, he overheard two board members talking. "They'll fall in line," one said. "They always do." The other replied. The man walked past them without a word. The next enforcement came closer to home. A warning was attached to his gate, claiming repeated violations. It listed dates and times, some of which he knew were wrong. It threatened fines if behavior didn't change. He took the paper down and placed it inside his folder. That night, he made phone calls. Not angry calls. Calm ones. He spoke with a local land surveyor who confirmed the road's original boundaries. He contacted a title specialist who explained how overlooked parcels sometimes remained privately held. Every conversation added another piece to the picture. He also learned something else. The HOA had assumed control without verifying ownership. They had relied on appearance, not documentation. The road connected to their development, so they treated it as theirs. Assumptions were dangerous. As days passed, some neighbors began pushing back. A few refused to pay fines. Others demanded proof. The HOA responded with more warnings, more patrols, more pressure. Tension spread. Conversations became shorter. Smiles faded. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the man stood by the road again. A patrol vehicle slowed but didn't stop this time. The guard looked uncertain, almost cautious. Power felt different when questioned. The man knew he was approaching a line. Once crossed, things would change. There would be no quiet return to the way things were. But doing nothing would change things too, just in a slower, heavier way. He wasn't interested in controlling anyone. He only wanted the truth respected. Back inside, he opened his folder and added new documents to it. Printed records, notes from conversations, copies of maps. The folder grew thick. At the bottom of a file from decades earlier, he noticed a detail he had overlooked before. A clause related to access and maintenance. A line that suggested future transfer was possible but never completed. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a door. He leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Outside, the sign stood stiff and official. The patrols continued their rounds. The HOA believed momentum was on their side. They didn't know someone had finally started reading the fine print, and they didn't know that confidence, when built on assumptions, could collapse quietly and completely by the time the third month arrived. The road no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a line drawn in the ground. On one side were people trying to live quietly. On the other were people trying to prove they were in charge. The man felt it every time he stepped outside. Conversations stopped when patrol vehicles passed. Neighbors avoided eye contact, not out of dislike, but caution. Everyone was measuring their words, their movements, even their thoughts. Another envelope arrived, heavier than the others. Inside was a notice of accumulated fines. The amount was large enough to scare, even though he knew it rested on shaky ground. The letter gave a deadline and mentioned possible legal action. He read it once, then placed it neatly into the folder. He had stopped reacting emotionally. This was no longer personal. It was procedural. That afternoon, he drove back to the county records office. This time, he wasn't searching blindly. He knew exactly what to ask for. Old transfer records. Maintenance agreements. Any mention of the road as its own parcel. The clerk recognized him now. She didn't rush him. "You're finding things, aren't you?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he replied. Enough to ask better questions. Hours passed as he read through documents that hadn't been touched in years. Some papers showed proposed plans that were never completed. Others referenced agreements that expired without renewal. Again and again, the road appeared as an exception. Something noted but never fully addressed. It had slipped through the cracks. On one page, he found a reference to an estate that once owned several connected parcels, including the road. The surrounding land had been sold off over time, but the road remained listed separately. No final transfer. No recorded public dedication. He copied the page and marked the reference. That evening, he made another call. This time to a legal office that handled estates. He asked careful questions, not making claims, just listening. The person on the other end confirmed that some properties remained under estate control far longer than people expected. "They're often forgotten," she said, "until someone needs them." That night, he didn't sleep much. Not from stress, but from focus. His mind kept arranging pieces, fitting them together slowly. The next HOA meeting was announced with bold language. Attendance was described as mandatory. The topic was enforcement and future action. The man decided to go. The room was fuller than before. Faces looked tight. The HOA leaders spoke firmly, using confident tones and official-sounding words. They talked about compliance, order, and consequences. One board member said, "We have full authority over this road." The man listened closely. When questions were opened, a resident asked for proof of ownership. The response was quick but shallow. "It's part of our operational area," the board member said. "That's not ownership," someone muttered. The man didn't speak yet. He watched how quickly the board moved on, how uncomfortable they seemed when pressed. After the meeting, a few neighbors gathered near the exit. They spoke in low voices. Some were angry now. Others were exhausted. "You seem calm?" One neighbor said to the man. "I'm paying attention," he replied. At home, he laid everything out again. This time, the folder was joined by a notebook. He wrote dates, names of offices, document numbers. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing for accuracy. A few days later, something unexpected happened. He received a call from someone connected to the old estate. The person explained that the road had been discussed years earlier, but never sold. No one had followed up. There was talk of transferring it to the county, the voice said, but it never went through. That was the moment things shifted. If the road wasn't public, it wasn't HOA property, then it existed in a quiet space few people noticed. A space where assumptions ruled instead of facts. The man asked a simple question. "Is it still available?" There was a pause. "Yes," came the answer. He didn't rush. He requested documents. He reviewed conditions. He confirmed boundaries with a surveyor. Every step was slow and deliberate. Meanwhile, the HOA increased pressure. Another patrol was added. More signs appeared. Letters were sent to multiple residents at once. They believed force would end resistance. The man believed patience would end confusion. Neighbors noticed his calm and began asking questions. Quiet ones, late at night, away from the road. He didn't promise anything. He didn't reveal details. He only encouraged them not to act out of fear. Read everything, he told them. Ask where authority comes from. Some listened. Some were too tired. As negotiations continued behind the scenes, the man felt the weight of responsibility. This was no longer just about him. What he did next would affect everyone who used the road. He thought about fairness, about access, about not becoming the very thing people feared. One evening, as he walked along the road, he imagined it without signs, without patrols. Just a simple path connecting people to their homes. He wanted that back. The estate documents arrived a week later. They confirmed what he had suspected. The road was a separate parcel, privately held. Forgotten, but legally intact. He read every line twice. This didn't mean victory yet. It meant possibility. At the bottom of one document was a condition for sale. Straightforward, reasonable, nothing dramatic. He sat quietly. For a long time after reading it, outside, a patrol vehicle drove by and slowed as if expecting confrontation. He didn't look up. The power dynamic was already shifting. Even if no one else could see it yet, the HOA scheduled another meeting, announcing plans to escalate enforcement if compliance didn't improve. The man smiled slightly when he read the notice. They were pushing forward. Unaware that the ground beneath their authority was thinner than they believed, he placed the estate documents into his folder. Now, heavy with proof, soon the conversation would change. Not through shouting, not through threats, through paperwork. And when that moment came, the road would finally speak for itself. The change didn't happen all at once. It started quietly, in small moments that most people missed. A patrol vehicle slowed less often. A warning notice stopped appearing on doors. One of the signs near the bend in the road disappeared overnight and was never replaced. The man noticed everything. He continued with his routine, not acting differently, not signaling that anything was about to happen. Inside, though, he was preparing. The estate documents were now reviewed, confirmed, and organized. The surveyor's report matched the old maps exactly. The road's boundaries were clear. There was no overlap, no shared ownership, no hidden clause that gave the HOA power. Still, he waited. He knew that timing mattered as much as truth. If he moved too early, confusion would follow. If he waited too long, fear would deepen. He needed the moment when confidence on the other side was at its highest. That moment came sooner than expected. Another notice arrived. This one addressed not just to him, but to multiple residents. It announced a final enforcement phase. Fines would increase. Access restrictions would be tightened. Legal steps were mentioned without detail, as if the words themselves were meant to scare. The man read it carefully, then folded it and placed it on the table. He felt calm. Almost relieved, he made a few phone calls that evening, short ones. Confirmations, not conversations. Everything was ready. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the end of the week. Attendance was again described as mandatory. The tone of the message suggested confidence, even victory. The room was packed. People sat closer together than before, not out of comfort, but tension. The HOA leaders took their places at the front, papers neatly stacked, expressions firm. They spoke about order, safety, and cooperation. They spoke as if the outcome was already decided. When enforcement was mentioned, murmurs spread through the room. The man waited until questions were invited. He stood slowly. The room went quiet. Not because people knew what he would say, but because they sensed it would matter. He spoke calmly. No raised voice. No emotion. "I'd like to ask a simple question," he said. "Can you show where your authority over the road comes from?" One of the board members smiled tightly and gestured to a binder. "It's covered under our documents," she said. "I've read them," the man replied. "The road isn't listed." The smile faded. Another board member leaned forward. "The road serves our community. That gives us jurisdiction." "That's use," the man said. "Not ownership." The room grew still. He continued, still calm. "The road is not public. It was never transferred to the county. It was never sold to the HOA. It remains a separate parcel." Whispers broke out. One board member tried to interrupt, but the man raised a hand slightly, not in challenge, but in clarity. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm here to correct a mistake." He placed copies of documents on the front table. Survey maps, estate records, county confirmations. each one labeled, each one clear. The HOA leaders flipped through the pages quickly. Their confidence slipped. Someone in the audience asked, "So who owns the road?" The man answered simply, "I do." Silence followed. The kind that feels heavy, not empty. A board member finally spoke. "When did this happen?" "Recently," the man said, quietly, legally. The meeting ended early. No one clapped. No one argued. People stood and left slowly, processing what they had just heard. Some looked relieved. Others looked shocked. Outside, neighbors gathered around the man asking questions all at once. He answered patiently. "I didn't do this to control anyone," he said. "I did it to stop control that didn't belong." The next morning, patrol vehicles were gone. By afternoon, HOA signs were being removed. Not officially announced, just quietly taken down. The man received an email requesting a private discussion. He agreed the conversation was tense but short. The HOA representatives were careful now, choosing words slowly. They spoke about misunderstandings and cooperation. The man listened, then explained his position. "The road will remain open," he said, "but it won't be used as a tool for pressure." They had no argument. Over the next few days, letters arrived canceling fines. Enforcement notices were withdrawn. Residents were informed that the road was no longer under HOA authority. The change was immediate. People smiled again. Guests arrived without hesitation. Delivery drivers stopped asking questions. The road felt lighter, as if it had been holding its breath. The man walked it one evening as the sun set. Watching neighbors talk again without fear, he knew the story wasn't over yet. Ownership brought responsibility. He would need to set boundaries, not as rules, but as respect. Still, he felt something rare. Balance. The HOA had learned a lesson it never expected. Authority could not be assumed. Confidence without proof could collapse in a single moment, and the road, quiet and unchanged, had once again become just a road. The days after the meeting felt unusually quiet, like the air after a storm has passed. No patrol vehicles. No warning papers. No new emails filled with threats. The road looked the same, but the weight that had hung over it for months was gone. The man did not rush to make announcements. He did not put up signs claiming ownership. He understood that people needed time to breathe, not more information. So he let things settle on their own. Neighbors slowly returned to normal habits. Cars parked where they always had. Friends visited without calling first to ask where they were allowed to stand. Children rode bikes along the road again, careful at first, then laughing louder as days passed. One evening, a couple stopped him while he was walking. They thanked him quietly, not with excitement, but relief. They said they had almost sold their home because the pressure became too much. He listened and nodded. "I didn't plan to be in the middle of anything," he said. "I just didn't want fear deciding how people lived." Word spread beyond the road. People from nearby areas heard what happened and shared similar stories of rules pushed too far. Some asked for advice. He gave little, only encouraging them to read documents carefully and stay calm. Power, learned, often depended on how few questions people asked. The HOA kept its distance. Official messages avoided mentioning the road at all. At one point, a short notice was sent explaining that access rules had been updated to reflect accurate boundaries. The wording was careful, almost polite. There was no apology. The man didn't expect one. Ownership brought responsibility. He took that seriously. He met with a few neighbors to talk openly. Not in a formal meeting, just conversations by fences and mailboxes. They talked about simple expectations. Slow driving. Respect for property. Keeping things clean. No fines. No threats. Just agreement. It worked better than rules ever had. One afternoon, he received a call from the county. A clerk asked if he had considered transferring the road into public hands. It would remove personal responsibility and place maintenance. Under county control, he thought about it carefully. Public ownership meant access without question, but also meant giving up control to another system. A system that might one day repeat the same mistakes. For now, he declined. "I'd like to keep it simple," he said. Life returned to small moments. coffee in the morning, sunsets at the bend in the road, waves from passing neighbors. The calm he once feared was lost, had returned, stronger because it had been tested. Looking back, he realized how easily things could have gone another way. If he had reacted with anger, the story would have turned loud and messy. If he had ignored the problem, fear would have slowly won. Instead, patience had done the work. The HOA moved on to other issues. New rules appeared for other parts of the community. Committees formed. Meetings continued. But the road was no longer mentioned. It had become invisible again. That invisibility felt like freedom. Months later, he walked the road after a light rain. The pavement was dark and clean. Trees reflected softly on the surface. Nothing about it suggested conflict or power. It was just a path connecting people to home. He stopped near the middle and stood quietly. He thought about how authority often arrived dressed as concern, and how easily it grew when no one checked its foundation. He thought about how many people believed rules were permanent just because they were printed. The truth was simpler. Ownership mattered. Knowledge mattered more. The road did not change the man. It reminded him of who he already was. Someone who valued calm over control. Someone who believed that silence, when backed by facts, could be louder than any threat. As evening came, a car passed slowly. The driver waved. The man waved back. No guards. No signs. No fear. Just a road, finally at rest, and a lesson that would travel much farther than the pavement ever did. Time has a way of revealing things that noise hides. Weeks passed, then months, and the road settled into a new normal. It no longer felt like a place people passed through carefully. It felt lived in again, comfortable, ordinary. The man noticed how people changed when fear left. Neighbors talked longer. Laughter returned in small bursts. Even disagreements felt lighter, because no one worried about unseen consequences anymore. But peace often invites new attention. One afternoon, a car he didn't recognize slowed near his gate. A man stepped out, well-dressed, polite, carrying a thin folder. He introduced himself as a consultant hired by the HOA. "I just want to understand the situation," the man said. The owner of the road listened without suspicion. He had learned that curiosity could be harmless or strategic. The consultant asked questions about access, liability, and future plans. He spoke carefully, choosing words that avoided blame. He suggested cooperation, shared responsibility, and possible agreements. The man nodded. "Understanding is good," he said. "Control isn't." They talked for a while. The consultant left without making demands. That night, the man thought deeply. The HOA might not control the road anymore, but it still surrounded it. Problems didn't always return the same way they left. Sometimes they came back wearing softer faces. A few days later, a neighbor stopped by with concern. The HOA had proposed new development near the far end of the road. More homes, more traffic. "They say it won't affect us," the neighbor said. "But we've heard that before." The man didn't respond right away. He walked down the road, imagining heavier use, louder days, tighter turns. Ownership meant the future would arrive at his door first. He requested the development plans and reviewed them carefully. Nothing illegal, nothing dishonest. Just growth. Growth always tested balance. At a small gathering, neighbors asked what he planned to do. Some wanted limits. Others wanted guarantees. A few wanted him to block everything entirely. He listened. "I won't turn this road into a weapon," he finally said. "Not against them. Not against you." Instead, he suggested a simple idea. Access would remain open, but large-scale changes would require conversation. Not permission, conversation. People agreed. The HOA sent another message proposing a formal agreement. This time, the tone was respectful. They acknowledged ownership and asked to collaborate on maintenance and traffic flow. The man read the proposal twice. It wasn't bad. It wasn't perfect. He invited them to talk. The meeting was different from all the others before it. No raised voices. No threats. Just people at a table with papers and coffee. The HOA representatives looked cautious, aware they no longer held leverage. "We don't want conflict," one of them said. "Neither do I," the man replied. "That's why this matters." They discussed limits, expectations, and long-term planning. Some requests were denied. Some were adjusted. Compromise existed, but it wasn't forced. When the meeting ended, no one felt victorious. That felt like success. As months went on, the road absorbed change without losing itself. Traffic increased slightly, but stayed respectful. Signs remained absent. The silence stayed honest. The man received messages from people far beyond his area. They shared stories of pressure, fear, and rules that appeared overnight. Some asked how he stayed calm. He always gave the same answer. "I didn't fight people," he said. "I read paper." One evening, as he sat outside watching the sun dip low, he realized something important. This story was never about winning. It was about preventing the wrong kind of power from becoming normal. The road taught him that ownership wasn't about control. It was about care. Years from now, someone else might walk this same pavement without knowing what happened. That was fine. Peace didn't need credit. A car passed slowly. Someone waved. The man smiled and waved back. The road remained quiet.
Not strong.
And free not because it was defended loudly, but because it was understood deeply. Years don't announce themselves. They pass quietly, marked by small changes that only make sense when looked at together. The road aged well. Cracks were filled when they appeared. Trees were trimmed when branches leaned too close. Nothing flashy, just care. The man kept his routine simple. Morning walks. Short conversations with neighbors. Long pauses where nothing needed to be decided. He learned that peace required attention, not control. One spring, a storm washed through harder than usual. Rain pooled along the edges, and a shallow dip near the bend began to hold water. Cars slowed, unsure how deep it was. No one complained. They just adjusted. The man called a local crew and had the dip leveled. It wasn't expensive. It didn't require approval. It was handled because it mattered. That small moment traveled faster than he expected. Neighbors mentioned it. People noticed how problems were solved without meetings or warnings. Quiet solutions built trust. The HOA changed too, though it would never say so publicly. New board members came and went. The language of notices softened over time. Rules still existed, but they were clearer, narrower, and less eager to reach beyond their borders. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the HOA, not a warning, an invitation. They were hosting a community discussion about shared spaces and wanted his perspective. He considered it, then went. The room felt different from the early meetings years ago. Chairs were arranged in a circle. People spoke one at a time. No one rushed. When it was his turn, he spoke simply. Authority works best when it knows its limits. No one argued. Afterward, a board member thanked him and admitted something quietly. "We didn't expect anyone to read that deeply," he smiled. "Most people don't," he said. "That's why it matters." Life kept moving. New families arrived. Old ones moved away. Children grew tall and left for places far beyond the road. Some came back years later, surprised at how little had changed. That consistency became the road's quiet reputation. One evening, the man noticed a stranger parked near the entrance, taking photos. He walked over, not suspicious, just curious. The person explained they were writing about local land disputes and had heard stories about a private road that stayed open. "People say you shut down an HOA," the writer said. The man shook his head. "No," he replied. "I shut down confusion." The article never appeared. Maybe it wasn't dramatic enough. That felt right. As time passed, the man thought more about what would happen when he was no longer there. Ownership solved one problem, but the future always asked new questions. He met with neighbors again, this time to talk about continuity. Not rules, values, respect, access. Care. They agreed on something simple. If the road ever changed hands, it would stay open. Not because it had to, but because it should. That agreement was written down, signed quietly, and stored away. No ceremony. One morning, as he walked the road at sunrise, he realized how rarely he thought about the HOA anymore. The story that once filled his days had faded into background memory. That was the real ending. Power struggles end loudly. Understanding ends quietly. A car passed. Someone waved. Someone else slowed to let a walker cross. Small acts, repeated over time, shaped the place more than any rulebook ever could. The man stopped at the bend and looked down the stretch of pavement. He remembered how tense it once felt. How words like compliance and enforcement had tried to live there, they never fit. The road belonged to itself now, guided by people who used it rather than owned it. As the sun rose higher, the man turned back toward home, leaving the road exactly as he found it, open, quiet, free. The road had a way of reminding people that endings were rarely final. Even after years of calm, small moments continued to shape it, quietly and without announcement. The man understood this better now. Peace was not something you won once. It was something you maintained by paying attention. One summer morning, a moving truck rolled slowly down the road. It stopped near a house that had been empty for months. A new family stepped out, looking around with cautious smiles. The man watched from a distance as neighbors wandered over to help, offering directions, spare tools, and friendly advice. No one asked for permission. That simple detail mattered. Later that day, the man walked over to welcome them. He didn't explain the history unless asked. He didn't want the road to carry old tension forward. Still, he mentioned one thing. "This place works best when people respect it," he said. They nodded, understanding more than the words suggested. As seasons changed, small challenges appeared. A delivery company began using larger trucks that struggled with the turn near the bend. One clipped a tree branch. Another left tire marks along the edge. Instead of reacting, the man called the company and explained the situation calmly. He sent photos. He suggested a different route for oversized vehicles. They listened. Problems shrank when handled early. The HOA noticed too. Though the road was no longer theirs to manage, its smooth operation reflected on the entire area. A board member reached out with a quiet suggestion to coordinate traffic flow during holiday events. The man agreed. With one condition: no notices without conversation, he said. That condition was respected. During the holidays, lights appeared along the road. Nothing formal, just neighbors adding small touches. People slowed to enjoy the view. Laughter drifted from porches late into the evening. The man stood outside one night, listening, and realized how different things felt compared to the early days of enforcement. Then, the quiet had been tense. Now it was warm. A letter arrived from someone he didn't know. It came from another town. The writer explained they were dealing with a similar situation, where authority had stretched beyond its reach. "I don't know where to start," the letter said. The man thought carefully before replying. He didn't offer tactics or promises. He shared something simpler. "Start by understanding what's true," he wrote. "Then move slowly." Weeks later, another letter arrived, thanking him. That was enough. Time passed. The road aged alongside the people who used it. It carried moving vans, wedding cars, and quiet goodbyes. It absorbed tire tracks and rainwater and sunlight without complaint. One afternoon, county reached out again, asking if he wanted to revisit the idea of public transfer. Infrastructure funds were available. Maintenance could be standardized. He walked the road before answering. He noticed how people navigated it naturally, slowing near homes, waving each other through tight spots. It worked because it was understood, not enforced. He declined again. Later that year, a power outage affected the area after a strong windstorm. The HOA focused on restoring service inside the development. The road sat just outside their immediate concern. Without discussion, neighbors organized themselves. One checked on elderly residents. Another cleared fallen branches. Someone shared a generator. The man joined in quietly by the time power returned. No one felt forgotten. That moment stayed with him. Peace wasn't built by rules. It was built by people choosing responsibility without being told. As he grew older, the man began to think about memory, about how stories changed when passed along. Already, he heard versions of what happened that sounded nothing like reality. Some made him a hero. Others made the HOA a villain. Neither felt right. The truth had been slower and simpler. One evening, he wrote a short note and placed it with the other documents in the folder. Not a legal paper. It's just a reflection. Power grows where people stop asking questions, he wrote. It fades when clarity returns. He hoped whoever found it someday would understand. The HOA eventually rebranded. New leadership, new focus. Past conflict faded from memory, replaced by newer concerns. That was fine. The road didn't need recognition. On a quiet morning, the man stood at the entrance and watched the light stretch across the pavement. Birds moved between trees. Jogger passed, nodding politely. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. He realized that the greatest change wasn't ownership of the road. It was how people now trusted their own judgment. They asked questions, they expected explanations, they no longer accepted authority simply because it spoke loudly. That lesson traveled beyond the road as he turned back toward home. Felt content. Not proud. Content. The road continued forward, unchanged in shape, but richer in meaning. Not because it was defended, because it was understood.